welcome to the Q&A Cafe here in Georgetown at the Georgetown Club with our guest, Jim Popkin. We're going to talk about spies, and since it's blustery cold outside, I think that's a perfectly warm way to spend a lunchtime. But thank you all for being here. I wanted to start with, we're going to talk about spies, but I wanted to start with just a little bit of fan clubbing for you, Jim, because he's got a huge fan club. I'm always hearing from these people who say, oh, you're talking to Jim Popkin, let me tell you what he did for me. I mean, that's a cool vibe to have, actually, especially in this town.
So you've been talking to my mother, in other words.
No, but I just thought I'd pull this one because it's connected to the Q&A Cafe, because the Georgetown Cupcake has sponsored us like forever and always sends cupcakes over. And I got this email from Sophie Lamontagne, one of the sister owners, and she said, just wanted to touch base on the cupcakes for next week. We'll decorate the cupcakes, we want to do this specially, we'll decorate the cupcakes with Jim's book cover, and we'll also include a separate gift-wrapped assorted dozen for Jim, with the book cover decorations for you to give to him, please. Catherine and I worked with Jim several years ago before COVID on a show he was producing, and he was so wonderful to work with, and he mentioned that he loved Georgetown cupcakes, so we wanted to include a dozen just for him to take home. Please say hi to Jim for us.
Very nice, very nice, thank you.
But seriously, Richard Sands is here in the audience, hiding way in the back, and his daughter, Allison, who works with me at CBS, worked with me at NBC, and because this is Washington, D.C., Jim also worked at NBC. But I had been hearing, for not months, but years, about Jim Popkin. That, how did I not know Jim Popkin, and I have to meet Jim Popkin. So finally, here it is. Allie's not here, but welcome.
Thank you so much.
And congratulations on your book, Codename Blue Wren. It is a page-turning spy thriller. And all I kept coming away with, and you kind of say this yourself, it's sort of, because only in Washington could you basically have the spy next door and not know it, right? I mean, I have a friend, Myra Moffat, so you may know her. Myra and I have always had this theory that basically every other neighbor we have in Georgetown is probably a spy. Or in most walks of life, the people we run into within the boundaries of D.C.
I hope a couple are here today,
I hope so,
but don't identify yourselves.
It's funny you should say that. When I owned Nathan's, and George Tenet was the head of CIA, and I was very naive. I was not a natural-born saloon owner. But this guy came in one day and he said, do you realize right now in your bar you have George Tenet in one corner, and over in the other you've got the Russian spies watching him, and then over there you've got undercover CIA watching them. And I, of course, had no idea. But I loved it.
It's one of the great things about Washington.
Right. So definitely. You could be right. Right now, sitting here, we could have crossways watching going on. But it is a fascinating story. Her name is Ana Montes.
Ana Montes.
Ana Montes. The most dangerous female spy in U.S. history. And she just got released from a little more than 20 years in federal prison.
Right.
And I think she's ended up in Puerto Rico.
Correct.
Have you contacted her since she's been out? She's been out?
I've kind of tried to through her lawyer, but as you might imagine, I'm not her
She
most
didn't endorse
favorite
the book?
person. No. I'm last on the list for interviews at this point.
A Puerto Rico book party?
Yeah.
Do you know where she's living in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, so, well, let me just, if I may, I'll just go to 30,000 feet here for folks. And by the way, if the salmon's cold, don't blame me. Ana Montes is, first of all, an American woman, but of Puerto Rican heritage. And it's a great Washington story. She lived here forever and had a condo in Cleveland Park.
Macomb Street.
Macomb Street.
I know the building.
Yeah, right across from Washington International School.
Yeah.
And she went to UVA, and then she went to SAIS and got her master's
at Johns
degree
Hopkins.
at Johns Hopkins.
Mm-hmm.
And it was both in Puerto Rico, a little bit in UVA at a junior year abroad, and then at SAIS when she really got radicalized and became very political. And at SAIS, she was recruited very slyly by the Cubans and started her spy career, which went on for just shy of 17 years. She went to Cuba, she got training with a classmate of hers, and the Cubans helped her apply to the Defense Intelligence Agency. And not everyone knows DIA, but the DIA is the intelligence arm of the Pentagon, the military. So it's a very helpful place for the Cubans if they're, as they are and probably should be, paranoid about American policy. And so she was inserted as a young woman at the DIA and kind of made her way, became very successful as an analyst, ultimately became a Cuba analyst for DIA and really the top Cuba
She was the
expert.
Queen of Cuba, they called her.
Known somewhat derisively as the Queen of Cuba. And this entire time she's working for the Pentagon, she's also working for the Cubans and for Fidel. And the story, you know, to me, it's a fascinating story. But what really hooked me was her siblings. Her sister Lucy, totally coincidentally, was hired by the FBI at the same moment that Anna started spying. And Lucy became a translator for the Bureau in Miami. The Miami field office, the FBI, works not exclusively, but it's the main office that tracks Cuban spies. She was assigned to a unit that was looking for Cuban spies, and she had no idea that her sister was
They were
one.
looking at each other.
Yeah. And Lucy then, she married a guy also in the FBI. And
Lucy did.
Lucy
Yeah.
did, the sister. And then she thought, the Bureau's looking for recruits, especially with diverse backgrounds. We're Puerto Rican. I'm going to call my brother. She called the brother and sister-in-law. They both became FBI agents. So at one point, Ana, the Cuban spy, has a brother, a sister, and two brother and sister-in-law, all with the FBI.
And so we'll stop there
Yeah.
and not give, and we'll save the ending for the end because I
Okay.
want to go down and break down some of the stuff
Great.
you've already covered
Yeah.
because it's there. In every chapter, there's nuggets that are so interesting, and I think one of the really interesting things is she comes from basically a dysfunctional family. Her father was an Army colonel, and he was abusive, physically abusive, and it shapes her personality. And I'd love for you to talk about that and also to the extent you've discovered whether there is a type who finds happiness or some kind of comfort in espionage, if there's a pattern of behavior, because I know this gets studied, you know, is an abusive, dysfunctional kind of lonely childhood a path, possible path? Because, you know, it seems that while she has boyfriends, she never has a lasting relationship. I mean, prison may have been an impediment in that. But is there a profile of who finds comfort in this kind of work? And is it related to the kind of background she had?
So just to back up with her father, as you said, Carol, her father was a physician, Dr. Alberto Montes. Brilliant guy, born in Puerto Rico, educated in both Puerto Rico and the United States, went to med school in New York. And he became a Freudian psychiatrist, which is the richest of all ironies. Because,
Later, after she's grown up and out of the house.
while she was growing up. Right,
okay.
because he starts in the Army and only spends a couple years there. They move, Anna was born in Germany, and they moved to Topeka, Kansas, where the Menninger Institute was. And Dr. Montes worked at a VA hospital there. But very quickly, he starts to get training as a psychiatrist and becomes a Freudian psychiatrist. Unfortunately, he was as you mentioned, a very abusive personality. At home with the kids, the abuse started when they were 5 years old. For any little indiscretion, normal childhood behavior, he would explode. He became abusive to his wife, Amelia, They later divorced. He had a second family, and the pattern continued. I met his stepdaughter, Michelle, and she told me just harrowing stories about how Alberto was with her and her young brother. And then her mother, Alberto broke the mother's arm in an argument once and had to go to the hospital. So it's
It's a
hard.
chaotic and disturbing family life.
It is, and it's hard to understand with someone who's so bright and also who's studying Freud and the effects of childhood, parental behavior
Yeah.
on children.
Doesn't make the connection clearly.
It didn't take.
But I wonder if it drives her inside herself or makes her develop skills of just keeping it all to herself and being able to be blending in, not noticed.
So
Because you don't want to get hit. Maybe if I'm not noticed, he won't come after me.
the CIA did an analysis of Ana Montes post-arrest,
yeah.
and they grilled her and they brought in all kinds of shrinks to talk to her and do tests. And their analysis was that the abuse that she suffered played a really important role in her development as a spy. But I will point out from the sister, Lucy, as I mentioned, was at the FBI. Lucy said, okay, I had the exact same upbringing, or similar, right? I also was abused by my dad. We lived in fear of my father. I ended up as a loyal FBI agent for some 30 years.
Who was younger and older?
Lucy is just a little more than a year younger than Anna. Anna's the oldest of four children. And then Tito also becomes an FBI agent. So how do you explain how siblings, especially sisters, go in such disparate directions?
Could be the age. It could be the age thing that the older one feels that I've got to protect my. But it goes to another interesting point because the CIA did do an analysis of her. I was stunned, or maybe I shouldn't have been, to find out that with all their skills of analyzing people, how easily she got security clearances and top secret security clearances. Yeah. Talk about that. She just had a succession of them. She just walked on.
It's really shocking. I mean, things have changed somewhat, one would hope. But she entered she started with the Justice Department as a young person, first real job, and then became recruited as a Cuban spy. And in 1985, got a job with the DIA, with almost really no testing. There was no polygraph, and they accepted an FBI background check that had been done several years earlier for her to join the Justice Department. So she joins, and they just kept giving her higher and higher clearances. She only took one polygraph the entire time, and she passed. And one reason why is that
she learned how.
The Cubans trained her.
I think this is...
Yeah, and so...
Talk about the training, though. I mean, it's like.
Well,
I know they're having lunch, but
it's a little delicate.
It's just training a certain reflex
yes,
action.
It involves the
body.
tensing of a part of the body. Let us just say, because you're all enjoying your salmon, and look, it's not clear if that actually helped and lowered her blood pressure when she was lying about answers, or if it just gave her some confidence to get her through, or she's just somewhat psychotic and
just a great liar,
right, and just a great liar.
But it is interesting that apparently you write, so I believe it to be true, that Cuba, as small as it is really famous for high-level espionage, and they provide some of the most expert training.
They're surprisingly good.
What did they teach her?
They're surprisingly good. They were, obviously trained by the Soviets, and then continued a close relationship with the Russians. So I'll go to her first trip there. So in 1985, she's still at SAIS. She and her friend Marta, who helped recruit her. Marta also was an interesting character. Yeah. Marta also was already a recruited Cuban agent at this moment. They decided to take their trip to Cuba for training and to meet their people. they use their real passports and they fly to Madrid. And in Madrid, they're met by a Cuban handler who gives them fake passports. And now the second leg is they fly from Madrid to Prague, which had long-standing relations with, especially with Cuba, but also Russia. They change their clothes, they put on wigs, and they have fake passports. And now they do the trip from Prague to Havana with another handler who's babysitting them. In Havana, they get training, Spy 101 training, which is important. They have to, how do you communicate with the home base? So they learn how to use shortwave radio, hone into certain frequencies. They have encryption that's ultimately put on Anna's laptop. So she puts in, it's called numbers station broadcasts. So you broadcast a series of 5 numbers, 150 sets of them. And it's actually fascinating. You can find this online.
Have you ever heard them?
I have, yeah.
I have too. I didn't know what it was until I read your book.
It's really interesting. So just some, in this case, what the Cubans would do was a woman in a sound studio in Havana, just saying,
it's very banal.
Cuatro, cinco, dos, dos,
Exactly.
uno. In just 150 sets. It's meaningless, obviously, unless
Utterly
you have the code.
monotone. It could put you to sleep.
Right.
But now we know.
So Anna learned how to use shortwave radio, how to decode, how to know if you're being followed, how to pass a polygraph. They put on the dog for her during this visit. They took her to military bases. She had lectures. She fell for a guy and had relations with a guy. Unclear if that was organic or planned.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a huge amount of training, but it was enough to get her started.
But she wasn't even yet fully signed on, was she? I mean, she was exploring it at that stage, it seemed to me, that they really put it on big for her. And she was at a stage where she could have gone back and just said, you won't believe what just happened to me.
Probably, but what they did that what was so clever is they had her complete an autobiography. So on day 1, they say, thank you, we're the Cubans, we'd like your help, thank you. Now we would like you to write your autobiography for us. And that seems pretty innocuous. But it gave them the ability to press buttons for the rest of her spying career and understand her psychology. And then they also gave her small tasks. And also they don't start by saying, we want you to spy for Cuba. They used her existing political interest, which at the time she was offended by Reagan's policies in Nicaragua, as many people were. It was very aggressive.
She was more radical, wouldn't you say, than the average government employee? I mean, she brought a lot of ideology into the job that she may have kept quiet about, but her friends knew.
Yes, and she was pretty outspoken at SAIS in graduate school. And so the Cubans used that, and they said, well, we want you to help us with Nicaragua. And by the way, why don't you translate these documents? That would be very helpful. So they create kind of a groundwork, and now it's very hard to get out now because she's already at the Justice Department with a clearance. She's working in the Freedom of Information Act office, but nonetheless, as a Justice Department employee in 1985, you are not allowed to go to Cuba, and you can't work. She's already compromised.
Yeah.
So they had their hooks into her very early, which was clever.
And this kind of went along fine, well for her. I mean, it was a life she seemed to adjust to. And then what seemed to happen was, and you could talk about it, almost back to back, the Nest case, and then her sister going to work, basically looking for people like her. So she lost her handlers, and then she had this dynamic of her sister now being in the mix, and this started to get to her, didn't it?
Yeah, and I'll talk about Lucy, because their relationship is tragic but also fascinating.
Bizarre, yeah.
So they were very close as young girls. Anna, as the oldest, was matronly and maternal. Bathed Lucy, helped her learn how to read, took her, instead of the mother, Amelia, to the first day of class. She was like a very active older sibling. And as they grew, their relationship suffered. It came to a head at Lucy's 40th birthday party in Miami, where she invited Anna. And Anna just sat like a lump, refused to engage with anyone. All her friends were looking at her, what is wrong with this person? And it wasn't until the arrest, years later, that Lucy realized what was happening and the psychological stress of spying. And I write in the book that spying is more born than bond. It's not really very glamorous. It's exciting and dangerous, but it's lonely. And if you think about it, if you don't have a spouse, let's say, who's engaged with you in this activity, who do you share your secret with? It's your handlers.
Right.
And you mentioned there was a case in 1996 that was called the WASP case. And it
the
was
WASP case.
WASP case, yeah.
Yeah. Nest.
And it actually started in Miami. And ridiculously, Lucy worked on this case. She helped the FBI find Cuban spies working in Miami. There was a big ring of them. And what happened is they were arrested, and it put pressure, unbeknownst to everyone, on Anna back in Washington. Because what happens with spy agencies, when your spies are caught, you go to ground, and you don't talk to them, you don't communicate, and you tell them not to reach out to their contacts. So Anna, this was her sole kind of social life and her release was talking to her handlers. After 96, they barely communicated. When they did, it was by pager, and they would have covert meetings overseas, typically in the Caribbean and in Cuba occasionally.
Do you think what made her different in that moment from some other spies is that it was for her a passion project and not a money project?
Yeah.
Where I think Ames and Aldrich Ames and Hansen, they were in it for the money.
Right.
I mean, maybe there was some ideology, but they were principally making
and
bank.
Ego, yeah.
And ego, yeah. But here's a woman who has finally kind of found a connection with her handlers, whatever, with the cause, and you can just imagine that she has no one she can go to. You can't even go to a shrink to talk about it.
Oh, it's interesting you mentioned that, because she did go to a shrink who I interviewed, and he claims that she never revealed what she was up to, and they.
Because how could what a risk that would be.
Yeah, So I should have mentioned. I mean, she's an ideological spy.
Yeah.
She took very little money. In 17 years, a couple $1,000s for expenses, essentially. They paid for her lousy Toyota Echo so she can get back and forth to the DIA.
No flashy James Bond car.
Right, no Aston Martin. Her laptop and some other minor expenses.
Which wasn't even a Mac.
No, it was a refurbished Toshiba laptop. Why would the Cubans buy a refurbished
There must be a
computer?
reason, but
they're very stingy. So she did it for love. She just really admired the regime, but mostly it was her. She was just very offended by U.S. foreign policy throughout the region and going back a century.
But she's at this juncture now where she's cut off from the people she's most connected with, and she's been cut off from her sister. And then doesn't her sister emerge now working on the very thing that Anna's doing?
Right.
Which
she joins this unit. They actually end up finding and arresting Cuban spies. It puts massive pressure on Anna. Psychologically, it was very difficult for her. She started manifesting a lot of kind of OCD behavior, showering for long periods of time. She had bars. Her sister-in-law told me after the arrest and going through her apartment, bars of soap lined up in the closet. She started eating only boiled potatoes for a long period of time, and she was seeing her shrink frequently.
I'm just curious, wouldn't the Cubans, who are so highly tuned in their training of the spies, be cognizant of a spy who's, degrading a little bit, maybe, like you say, having emotional crisis perhaps? Wouldn't they have somebody who comes in and takes care of it to make sure they, don't spill the beans?
Yeah, I don't know if they were able to do that because at that period
They'd gone to ground
they were
completely.
so worried about being caught. But toward the end of her career, she met a guy who she really did care about and wanted to give up the spy game and marry him, and they were not down with that. It doesn't work that way. Once you're in, it's kind of like the mafia. It's very, very difficult to leave. And she was hugely successful for them. She was a great analyst on the legit side of the fence. She was very, very competent. I mean, she had a great reputation professionally, not so much socially. She was very dismissive of people, the kind of person who would walk right by you in the hall and never say hello or yell at you in a meeting. But for Cuba, she was a godsend. She had two jobs, essentially, if you think of it this way. She had her day job at DIA. She'd go in and she had legitimate access to all kinds of classified information. And she knew not to take papers out of the building. So she memorized. And she had a good memory and she made it better through training. And she would just memorize these documents and then she'd come home and her night job would begin. And she'd type everything that she learned that day that she found important into her Toshiba laptop. And then she would provide, every couple of weeks, she'd meet with her handler in D.C. before they ran away, and she would give them a disk with all her information. So she dumped would be equivalent to thousands of pages in 17 years. This is why I would argue she's the most dangerous female spy in American history and one of the most important spies we've ever had. She revealed the true names of Americans working in Cuba. That's very dangerous. No one was ever killed that we're aware of.
Wasn't there a Green Beret who may have been?
Right, not an American in Cuba, but there was a Green Beret who was working in El Salvador who was killed shortly after she visited. And she was grilled about this after her arrest. She claims she didn't remember him, and she couldn't say that she ever provided the Cubans specific information about this one American, but he was killed in an ambush, and she did say, this is precisely the kind of information that I would have shared. So some people really do think she has blood in her hand for that incident.
But no blood in her veins.
Possibly, or cold.
Well, I mean, at the heart of it, doing what she was doing, you have to have some disconnect from normal human emotional behavior.
Absolutely.
Well, carry on now, because it comes to a juncture that I think is also interesting. And this is, goes back to the 9/11 era of our country, where we did find out later that there was such bad communication between agencies. But she benefits from FBI, CIA, DIA not really connecting the dots with each other, because she might have been discovered much earlier.
Yeah. She was interrogated by a DIA officer in '96. His name is Scott Carmichael. He ultimately really helped lead to her arrest because he figured out the riddle. But when he first interviewed her, he came away suspicious, but he didn't have anything. She was pretty good at hiding the ball. What happened is in 2000, I'm going to throw out some acronyms here, but the NSA, the National Security Agency, got hold of communications between Havana and Washington, essentially. And it was these number stations broadcasts. They learned how to decode them. And they started reading through and analyzing these conversations. And they realized that there was an unidentified agent at a high level who kept being mentioned. And they put together all these clues.
Somewhere in the U.S. government, but they have no idea.
No idea what agency. They don't even have a gender. They think it's probably a man because of how they say he, and occasionally she, but they don't know. They put the information together, and there's a very clever analyst at NSA who coincidentally is a Cuban American, forced to flee Cuba at age 6 with her family and not a big fan of the Castro regime. She gets her, sinks her teeth into this case and brings it to the FBI. The FBI doesn't know what to do with this, and these spy cases are difficult because you don't want the spy to know what's going on. The FBI somewhat spins their wheels for about 2 years. They never get close to Montez. And this agent at NSA, analyst, gets very frustrated and also is told inaccurately that the FBI had closed the case. That was actually not true, but she believed it to be the case. Out of frustration, she goes behind the back of the FBI and she reaches out to some spy chasers, essentially, at DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. This is coincidental. She has no idea that Anna even exists or that she works at DIA.
It's like a cold call? I'm just gonna.
It was a little bit.
It wasn't like a relationship,
No,
people she knew.
it actually was a little bit of a cold call. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a good term. And she meets this community of folks, and this is what they do, and they're pretty good about Cuba. And she gives them, even though she's not supposed to, a couple of these clues.
Yeah.
They take it, and they realize instantly. I'll tell you, one of the clues was it had to do with the word safe, S-A-F-E. The FBI heard safe, and they thought, oh, a safe, you know, one of those.
Safe, yeah.
It's not, it doesn't mean that if you work at DIA. SAFE was the acronym that described DIA's internal, kind of their internet almost, for raw intelligence. So it had a very different meaning. And when they saw SAFE, they thought, huh, I wonder if this is a DIA employee. And they gathered together these facts, and it really only took a couple days, and they realized it had to be Montez, based on lots of different
It's amazing how quickly it
circumstances.
synced up once they...
Yeah. And then there was, as you mentioned, Carol, this bureaucratic infighting between agencies. First of all, the FBI was furious that someone at NSA was talking out of school. They threatened to have this woman fired.
Instead of rewarding her.
Yeah, and arrested.
Yeah.
So that didn't go well. Then DIA figures out it's Ana Montez, and they bring this information to the FBI. There are several tense meetings with the FBI. They go, well, first of all, you're wrong because it's a man. We know it's a man. Secondly, we think it's probably someone at CIA. So thank you very much for your help. And there's quite a pecking order also between the DIA and FBI. They're at the top of the echelon.
Yeah.
So it took a long time to convince them that this was likely the person. I will say that once the FBI realized that, they did what the FBI does incredibly well. They threw all kinds of agents and resources at it. They started to follow Montez. They broke into her apartment on Cleveland, on Macomb Street in Cleveland Park. Surreptitiously, they actually got a FISA warrant to do this, and that really broke the case because.
Did she know? Would she have known they'd gone in, or was this so clean that you couldn't tell somebody had just rifled through all your private papers?
It was a black bag job where they're so careful they try not to disturb the dust in the apartment.
Okay.
So she didn't know. She had some clues later on that she was being followed, but she had no
But if you're the
idea.
next door neighbors, you might wonder.
They were very worried about that.
Yeah, I guess, but they know. They know how to
They're pretty good
make
at
it
it.
all look legit.
So the key thing is they found her laptop. They did a mirror image of the hard drive. And a couple days later, Anna was not able to delete everything. And they found uncoded information back and forth with the Cubans, including one haunting message from her Cuban handlers to Anna that said, "Thank you for the information about an American, presumably a CIA intel officer headed to Havana. Quote, we were waiting for him here with open arms." So what the Cubans did was they said, we're not going to arrest them, we're not going to kill them, we're going to watch them. And because of the work that Anna had done behind the scenes, our entire intelligence operation was compromised in Cuba. It was a waste of time.
There were some of these investigators who felt she should get the death penalty
Correct.
because she had basically trashed all the U.S. systems
Right.
of working on policy, intel, whatever they were doing.
Right.
She brought the whole house down.
She did. She also revealed a highly secret stealth satellite that the U.S. government was operating at the time, not just in Cuba, it was working in Russia, China, Iran. She blew that. She got read into it. Very few people were. She told the Cubans are known to trade information or sell it. So the presumption is the Russians knew immediately, and it ruined the effectiveness of that satellite as well. So yeah, I mean, it's treason what she did. It's eligible for the death penalty. Ultimately, they cut a deal with her where she got 25 years
Was that in federal
prison.
court in D.C.? Is that where
Correct.
they handled
Yeah.
the case?
Yeah. She got 25 years, and she just got out. And she got out in January.
She just got out, but it seemed to me at that point in the book that you indicate that she might have been okay if she died. I mean, that she felt that her work could lead to her death. I mean, that she, not that she sought the death penalty, but that she had a philosophical resignation to that she didn't really want to be in prison. You know, could commit suicide.
She wasn't crazy about being in prison, but I think she long ago accepted what the ramifications were. And you know, I'm no fan of hers, but I will say this. What she did with her family, you can look at it this way. She refused to talk about her work with her sister, but also her brother and other family members. You can see that as pathological, maybe, that she didn't want to, but you could also see it as strategic and as protecting them. Because once they were arrested, she and the whole family could legitimately say, I have no idea what she was doing. She refused to ever talk about her work with me. And that, you know, that helped her
They were
siblings.
innocent, yeah.
They were allowed to continue their work at the FBI, and they were innocent.
Are they all still there, or are they retired?
They've since retired. Yeah.
And her prison existence was I mean, it was prison, but she even there, which is a remarkable thing to achieve in prison, she just kind of stayed in the corner. It sounds like she was not invisible, but she was not a dynamic personality in prison either.
She kept to herself, which is her, you know, consistent
Yeah.
with her behavior. She was in one of the toughest women's prisons in the country. It was essentially the supermax for women.
For women,
And
yeah.
it's called Carswell Prison. Carswell is well known for a medical facility they have, and it's a large campus. But she was in a prison within a prison at Carswell with only about 24 women. I had the distinct honor and privilege of interviewing one of her bunkmates, essentially, Squeaky Fromm.
Lynette. Yeah.
So Squeaky Fromm, of course, of the Manson family, and she also attempted to assassinate President Ford, was with Anna in this prison within a prison at Carswell. And I opened the book with my conversation with Squeaky, because what Squeaky said was, you know, I had it tough in prison, but you know who really had it tough? Ana Montes. She had more restrictions than I did.
Yeah, they were on her all the time, right?
And it's because she had so much classified information. And I thought, that is remarkable. This woman who went to UVA and SAIS, daughter of a doctor and psychiatrist.
Had it all.
Had it all, lives in a condo in Cleveland Park. She had more restrictions in prison than Squeaky Fromm, Charles Manson's girlfriend.
I did an interview with Manson in prison, and after it aired, I started getting letters from Squeaky and other members of the Manson family. Just like, well, not to my home.
Why are you interviewing me? Because I want to hear about this, Carol.
No, but I just didn't even know it was possible. And I'm like, it's another story. This is about you, not about me. But let me ask you this. Is her life in danger now? I mean, would the Cubans want to take her out? Are there others who might want to take her out? Is she just living? Is she just walking down the street and going to the market? And
I don't think her life is in danger. I think that she shouldn't go to Miami, given the Cubans in Miami.
Yeah.
But she
is free to go wherever she wants.
She
right?
is. She's on probation for 5 years. She has a lot of restrictions still.
Does she have a U.S. passport?
Yeah, I think she does. I don't
Okay.
think they took that away.
Because I don't know if you need one to go to Puerto Rico. You may be able to do it with your driver's license.
Yeah,
I honestly
yeah.
don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Good question.
Well,
I don't know if she still has her passport, but she's in Puerto Rico. She has family in Puerto Rico, including a cousin who admires her, and politically they're aligned. There's a small but vocal community of hardcore Cuba-loving left-wingers in Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. And if you go online, there are these affinity pages for Ana Montes. She's a martyr and a hero, especially for Cubans, but also for a small but vocal community in Puerto Rico. So she's found her people. And when she got out, she put out a statement through her lawyer, completely unapologetic. She still feels the same way she does politically. And I can't say...
I think prison can do that for you.
I don't think she has regrets.
Yeah.
I think she probably regrets being caught, but she doesn't have regrets about what she did.
She's not old. I mean, she's in her 60s, isn't she?
She's, 66 now.
Yeah, yeah. So when the paperback comes out of your book, there obviously could be room for an update, a new epilogue. If you could go down and spend time with her, what are the chief things you'd want to ask her? I mean, what are the things you don't know that only she could tell you?
That's great. Well, I'd kind of nerd out a little bit on some of the early stuff. I mean, her junior year abroad in Madrid is fascinating. She fell in love with a guy who was a real leftist. I kind of want to understand a little bit more about how that influenced her. I'm fascinated with, as I talked about, her relationship with her family, whether that was strategic or just life and just who she became.
Yeah.
I really would love to know more about what she did in Cuba. She took at least 4 trips to Cuba. 2 were for work, for DIA, authorized. Even then, she snuck away and met with her handlers. So I'd want to know more about that, how she pulled that off. And then about the illegal trips as well, which were so interesting, including with her girlfriend. Quick aside, this story...
You have 2 minutes. Take it.
All right. So Ana had a friend that she met in her junior year abroad named Mimi Colon. Mimi's in the book. She lives in the area. After Ana went to Cuba, she comes back and she sees her friend Mimi. And they were young women at the time. And as young people do, Ana wanted to tell her about the really cute guy she met on her trip. So she tells Mimi, I met a guy, we had an affair, he took me all over the island, and he even took me to military installations. Well, about 2 weeks later, Ana realized, oh no, I shouldn't have done that. I told someone who knows me from college that A, I went to Cuba, remember she's not allowed to go, she's at the Justice Department, and B, I met a guy and he took me to military installations. That's not the normal thing that an American tourist does. Poor Mimi got cut out of her life. Ana refused to answer her calls, her letters, with no explanation.
Like it was Mimi's fault.
Right. And she was just sitting there. She had no explanation for what happened. And it wasn't until Ana's arrest 10 days after 9/11 that she went, oh my God, that is what happened.
Together.
She told me about her trip, and she realized I was a link, and so she cut me out of her life.
Well, it's been fascinating hearing about this, and I've tried to leave out a lot of other juicy parts that are in the book because you've got to go downstairs and buy the book, and Jim's going to hang around and sign some books, but this was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carol.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Again soon.